Welcome to the Rise to Thrive podcast with your hosts, Linda Tate and Amelia Travis, your life resource for manifestation, wellness, and abundance. Tune in weekly to thrive daily. This week's episode coming at you. Welcome to Rise to Thrive, episode 10. Today we are excited to talk to you about boundaries. Your hosts, Amelia Travis and myself, Linda Tate. Have you been having trouble sleeping lately? Feeling stressed, anxious, low energy? You may have a boundary issue.
Oh dear. If I can see myself in those symptoms, Linda, what does it mean?
You might want to check in about what could be draining you and what you could do about it.
Well, I will say this, your girl has boundaries, and I have boundaries because I have to have boundaries because I am naturally a person who does not have, or I don't even know if it's naturally, I have been in the past through the course of my life, a person who did not erect healthy boundaries, and as such, felt that people were taking advantage of me, found myself saying yes to things where I really wanted to say no, and often ended up, if I did say no, felt so much guilt afterwards and would just obsess for like days or weeks about the thing that I said no to or the thing that I said yes to that I didn't really want to go to. So if anyone out there can identify themselves in that, you might have a boundary issue too.
Do you think people are born with boundaries? Could you be born with boundaries?
I mean, I think people are born with different personalities. And I think in those inherent personalities, some people are more naturally accommodating and some people are more naturally like within themselves, right? And we might even just say, well, some people are more naturally introverted and some people are more naturally extroverted. And in that, you know, if I were going to use those words around it, I might say that an introvert probably has a tendency towards having more boundaries just because they know that they gain energy from being alone, right? Where extroverts gain energy from being in social interaction. And so they might naturally need to erect more boundaries in order to feel healthy from a younger age, where extroverts might not recognize their own need for boundaries until a little bit later. But overall, I think that boundaries, and I think that our all of our interpersonal, you know, skills and all of our kind of relational abilities are for the most part learned. I think those are things that we learned from the people around us. And I think that if we early on, you know, we see a model of a strong desire to please the people around us, that might result in us not having as strong of boundaries. If we see an early model of people around us being taken advantage of or being harmed, we might erect really rigid boundaries from a young age as a self-protection measure.
Could go either way.
Yeah, I think we learn them, and I think they're continually changing and evolving depending on our life circumstances. I think for many people, it takes their not their whole lives, but well into their adult life to recognize how important it is for them to actually establish clear boundaries.
Or never have that experience.
True. That can absolutely happen as well.
I think what's interesting is like, this isn't something that may be necessarily taught, you know, head first in like the school system. Is like, you might learn something like, you know, don't take that, that's not yours. And you learn these lessons around boundaries, you know, kind of backdoor lessons. But what an opportunity to consider how you can start teaching kids, you know, boundary consciousness.
Yeah, and I think that we actually have some, destructive is a strong word, but I think we have some unhealthy or lack of boundaries that we just teach through like idioms in our culture, like sugar and spice and everything nice. That's what little girls are made of. That's bullshit. Like, that's not true. And there's a cultural and social influence that says that nice women, especially, say yes. That nice people say yes, really. And like, we're taught that, you know, if it's nice to say yes, then that means that saying no is maybe not nice. And that's a really harmful, potentially harmful thought pattern to set people up in. But it's something that we do.
Yeah, that's I find myself in that sometimes, like the conundrum of, am I being stubborn? Am I like kind of, this is within the context of my household. So do I feel like I have to do something because it's a gender role, or is it like the equal opportunity for either person in the relationship to do that, and going back and forth around what is like an imposed gender role that is like what I should be doing? But I'll sometimes swing the pendulum of like, I'm not doing that, where it's just like, well, I could pull my weight and do that. But it's interesting how you bring it up in that context.
It took, oh my gosh, I don't think my husband and I had that conversation until we'd been dating and married. We'd probably been together for at least 5 years, maybe longer. And I remember he finally said, hey, can we have a conversation around household responsibilities and who does what? And he's like, because I feel like there's some things that I'm doing that I don't want to be doing and that I expect you to be doing, but you're not doing them, and I'm tired of it. And I'm like, it took you 5 years to have this conversation with me. But it was interesting because then when we had the conversation, he was like, well, you're the girl, so you're supposed to do the laundry and do the dishes and do, I don't know what else the other thing was. He was like, and I'm the guy, so I'm supposed to take out the trash, and I'm supposed to like keep everything on the outside clean and fix everything. And like the reality was he was doing all of it and I was doing none of it because he's, he was he's retired military, so he had those very clean tendencies, and he's just a naturally very organized person. And so he was doing all that stuff, and I was doing none of it. And that was him saying, hey, we need to create some boundaries. We need to figure out where the line of my responsibilities ends and the line of your responsibilities begins. And the funny thing is, at the time I was a little bit defensive, just a little bit. But really I was like, well, this seems really like a lot of gender bias is going into like, who decided that like I have to do the laundry and the dishes? Like, what if I don't like doing that? You know what I mean? Like,
what I hear too is like through the boundaries, the possibility for a lot of freedom, once they're both honored. And certainly gender bias has a way of poking its head, which could be a whole other episode.
Yeah. Well, so the beautiful thing was though, like it actually was so enlightening to me to know that he had this structure that he was hoping that we would find our way into, and that we'd never discussed it for 5 years. But I was like, okay, when I kind of got over my initial defensiveness, I was like, okay, tell me all the things that are the wife's job, right? Because this is what he had in his head, is like, this is the wife's job, this is the husband's job. And we're blowing it, like we're not doing it right. I'm like, okay, well, why don't you tell me how we're supposed to be doing it? But that's just an example. That's not at all to reinforce, if anyone out there is listening and thinking, I hate Rise to Thrive podcast because they're telling me I'm a woman and I have to do dishes. No, I'm not telling you that. I'm saying this is an example of erecting boundaries. And oftentimes I think we recognize that we need boundaries. Like Linda, you said in the opening, like you feel uncomfortable, drained, you feel out of alignment, you feel unwell in some way, the general sense of dis-ease. You feel uncomfortable about a situation that you're in, but you keep on doing it. You feel exhausted or depleted from putting other people's needs first. These are like symptoms. So if you recognize these in yourselves, it's an opportunity to learn about boundaries, which is perfect because you're here and you're listening, and now we're going to talk about them.
And I think too, like one of the aha moments that I had talking about this is, there's the contrast of like every time you've kind of gotten a boundary wrong, every time that you kind of overstepped a boundary or didn't honor your boundary. And that's giving you the information of what that feels like to say, oh, this is where I need boundaries. And it's in those moments of the argument or a lot of pain, or like I look back to some of my stronger boundaries, and it was just in those moments of being able to say, no, like I can't stand for that any longer. But until I could feel kind of what that feels like internally to know that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that I don't even know that we can actually create healthy boundaries without first having recognized where the boundary line is, right? So my analogy for boundaries is like boundaries are like fences between neighbors, right? You need the fence to make sure that your neighbor's not always just coming on over to your yard, bringing whatever they want to bring, setting up camp on your porch, like coming to just chit chat with you whenever they want. But we can have, all different kinds of fences, right? We can have no fence at all, which is like, that's when they can just come in whenever they want, bring all their emotional baggage with them to your yard. We can have broken fences. We can maybe have like old, worn down fences with holes in them, where like maybe the neighbor, would struggle to get in, but like their cat keeps coming into your yard, right? And we can also have, really, really strong fences, right? We can have a big ass like stone wall with a moat and like a ring of fire around it, and that might be an example of like maybe your boundaries are a little bit rigid or a little bit too strong. So there is kind of this nice white picket fence, space of boundaries where it's just a friendly reminder of this is my space and that's your space. This is where my emotional being ends and your emotional being begins. And I can wave at you from on the other side of the fence and say, good morning, neighbor. And you can say, good morning, neighbor. And then we can be like,
John.
yeah, we were like, isn't this nice that we're both on the appropriate side of our fence and we can see each other, but we feel safe and protected and we're not coming into each other's emotional yard with all of our shit.
No, I mean that it's interesting because I was a garbage dumper, a neighbor garbage dumper.
You were a fence hopper.
I was a fence hopper, but it was from me not fully understanding how to handle my emotions and like have a process for myself, that as soon as I would be with anyone that I considered a somewhat friend, I could, kind of emotional baggage dump. And I feel so blessed that the friends in my life now and the friends that have seen me through that time, I don't know. I think I would have been the worst friend ever. It's like, oh gosh, Linda, again, this is like, what's going wrong? And I look at my own evolution to understand that, it's both the giving too much and then when you're taking too much, and there's like that fine equilibrium of that space. And, a simple tool of just asking for permission, hey, do you mind if I have 5 minutes? I really need to get this off my chest, versus the like diving off the block, streamline, emotional dump. That's a swim reference.
Wow. I find that really profound because I have ended friendships, and this is like an example of me not having the best or most clear boundary. I've actually ended friendships because the person was bringing all their emotional garbage into my yard all the time and not asking for permission. And I got tired of having my yard filled with garbage, and right. It was like, could there have been a conversation in which I was able to reflect to them, hey, I understand when you need to do emotional external processing. I also have an entire life and family and everything of my own, and it's very emotionally draining when you call me and without asking permission, unload your entire, week worth of drama and problems. And after a few years of that, like, no, I'm done with that. Like, I do not have room or space in my life for that. And so for me, rather than erecting that healthy boundary or finding a way to communicate that to them and give them the opportunity to change, I've just burned bridges. Like, I'm just like, and I'm done, right? Like, right. And that's enough of that. Okay, and bye. Like, now my moat's going up and I'm setting my dragon outside my moat. Like,
cue the fire.
Yeah.
But truth, like it's the truth, being able to tell the truth within yourself, and then having the courage to, maybe you're not going to say that to Mary Jo every single time she's doing the neighbor dump, but you could say it one time and say exactly that, and just asking for a little bit more respect around the boundary. And I actually it's laughable now, a very similar situation where I felt a boundary broken, and it was the lack of communication and me being too afraid to just address it head on, of like, this made me uncomfortable. Could you please like not ask me that anymore? And I think, it took like a weird hiatus and, a friend mend, but to have been able to have just said that straight up with truth and honesty. And, why does that feel so hard sometimes, to be able to tell the truth to myself first, that this is making me uncomfortable? And it could be because of all my own past triggers and have literally nothing to do with that person. And to be able to say, hey, listen, like, this is triggering because of X, Y, or Z. And I notice that I feel the same way towards you. I don't want to feel that way towards you because I love you, but this can't happen anymore for me. Or I
Yeah.
prefer this not to happen, or, whatever language feels right. And once again, like, the beauty of the process to even be able to get to the point where we have the awareness of that experience.
Yeah. And I think we want to just recognize that that's not easy. So if you are listening and you're like, yeah, you guys, I'm trying to do this and it's hard, we fully honor that. It is hard. Learning to tell the truth and tell it in love and do that consistently, I think is a lifelong journey for all of us. And I think that it's something that can only be rewarded when we have the courage to do it. And so that's kind of the trick, right? Is like, you have to jump and believe that it's going to be okay, or believe that you're going to be okay, even if for whatever reason that relationship does change, or does, it does have to look different. And I think, especially because the majority of time when we really need the boundaries, like, there's a reason that we didn't have them. And for me, it's like, it's because your compassion for others has inhibited your compassion for yourself. Like, you have had compassion or desire to please or love for others that you're demonstrating it. You're very, demonstrative of it, but then it gets to the point where, like, that means you're not demonstrating love or compassion to yourself. So you have to find the balance. But it's only when we tell the truth that we have the opportunity for freedom that follows when it goes okay, or it goes even better than we expected. We also have the opportunity for freedom and for growth in those times that we tell the truth and it's not received the way that we desire it to be, but we've honored ourselves, and there's always information in whatever unfolds after that, right? And even if people don't respond to it exactly the way that you want them to in that moment, truth is always the path to freedom for them and for you and for them, right? So something will shift or shake in them, and if nothing else, you're showing them, this is what my healthy boundary looks like. You also have the opportunity to check in on your own boundaries. And I want to ask you, Luna, because a few minutes ago you said something about taking. And I think many people like myself, I can identify myself in the people pleasing and in needing to set boundaries out of giving. Will you talk a little bit about what does it feel like to need to set a boundary out of taking, or to recognize that? I mean, you said it with the emotional stuff, but like, can you give us a more tangible example of like, what is that? What's an example of what that feels like?
I think in this day and age, there's such a focus and emphasis on comparison. So this could be an easy example where, if you're wanting like to just know because you're wanting to compare and to kind of, that's it, like the side by side, and you're asking. This is a great example where I used to do this, where I felt really insecure about myself in terms of like education. And I wanted to be this like wellness expert. And I always wanted to know like exactly what someone that I considered a wellness expert had done. And it was like, in that experience, it was like understanding the different educational credentials. Even in that, it felt like taking, because it was an element of comparison person. And it was just to like, it wasn't about me connecting with myself to be on my path. It was about me being like, I want to be just like Mary. And that's where it feels like the taking. It's like, and then I can do this, this, and this and be just like her. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That wasn't the plan here. It's like connecting who Linda Tate is and being on my, divine God-given path and go that route. And maybe there's information and knowing the different programs that Mary went through to be able to understand, oh, that's interesting, like informative, right? Amelia, what kind of car did you just get? I'd love to know. That's a lot different than like, I gotta get that car. And so that's ways that
It's a Mazda, Linda. I actually copied you.
So that feels like the taking, the stealing, right? And it's like the different versions of stealing that could even be so light, but it's I think the intention behind it. Does that answer?
You guys, this is Linda's way of subtly telling me that I totally copied her, bit her style by buying a Mazda. She has Mazda too.
This is
I'm Mary in this conversation.
Yes, the official sponsors of today's podcast.
Yeah, well, actually, and as you were saying that, it brought to light an example of where I've been taking and different, but around just like work hours. I obviously am self-employed. I work from home. My husband is the primary caregiver for our 2-year-old. And it's very easy for me to justify excessive taking in the name of needing to work. And so I think sometimes, it's like two sides to it here. I will allow my work calendar to be more open than it maybe is like healthy for me, which is an example of a weak boundary, right? And then on this other side, like what does that result in for my family? Well, that results in my husband having to take the lion's share of the childcare. Sometimes when he doesn't expect it, he expects me to be done at 4 p.m. on the dot. And then if I'm giving beyond my boundary to a client or to a person in a work situation, and then he's in, the living room in the kitchen waiting for me to be done until 4:45, 5 o'clock, 5:15, then I'm taking on that one, right? And so that's kind of being on the other side of like, he's been involuntarily having his boundary violated.
Yeah, not honoring that boundary to the fullest. And, this is something that recently came up for me where it was a simple miscommunication around like timing and what time of my partner being home. And I realized, it's not a big deal, but I feel loved and respected when time is honored. And that felt like such a better way to communicate that boundary to me when enough not a big deals stack up. It's a really huge big deal. And so nipping that in the butt before it gets to that point. And that little tool of saying I feel loved and respected, that's helped me understand how I approach any of my boundaries, because the person I'm in relationship with, whether friend, family, lover, it's like I want that to be like the primary feeling in the relationship is love and respect. So to approach it from that way instead of like, you do this every time and and it's, take a note on that one.
Well, I think that's really helpful. And I think that's a good example of the beginning of a boundary script. And I think that when you're not even just when you're first starting, I think for everyone, having some prompts for boundaries that are kind of script based can be very helpful, because sometimes it's difficult to figure out how to communicate a boundary, even if it's just within yourself. So I think I feel loved and respected when XYZ is a perfect start. I also think that another thing that can be helpful in scripting is people may not, simply deciding what is not permissible for you in terms of your interpersonal relationships. For me, people may not go through my personal belongings without asking me. People may not invade my personal space to the point that I feel unsafe. People may not take their anger out on me or humiliate me in front of other people. People may not tell off-color racist jokes in front of me. People may not make comments about my weight. These are things that I have a boundary around. And so that starts with people may not do this thing, and then a consequence. If this thing happens, then I will do X, Y, and Z to remove myself from the situation. Then I will communicate with them in a loving way that this is where my boundary is. you know, and I have one that I'm realizing now, like it needs a little refinement, like, and it's simply like, I don't want to be around negative energy and drama. And so if something, a situation, a friend, whatever is going to expose me to negative energy and drama, and I know that in advance, I will decline to be in that situation. And so that's an example of me setting a boundary for myself when, you know, Sally's calling, and I know every time I hang out with Sally, she's gossiping and she's bringing the negative energy, and she's bad mouthing other people, like, and I'm not into that. Then I'm just gonna say no, thank you, Sally. It's not like I'm not trying to change Sally in this situation. I'm just gonna decline to go to Sally's cocktail party because I don't want to hear the
This
drama.
this reminds me, recently I had a friend that it was like a break in a friendship that they had gone through, and it was exactly that, where it was almost like something, you know, that was the tipping point, the break in the friendship happened. And I said, did you notice any of that before? And he was actually embarrassed because, or maybe not embarrassed, but he had the awareness that he had let so much of like the boundary breaking fly for so long, and it had been like an environment that he didn't want to be in, but he had been in, and it was like he had already invested so much into like breaking his own boundary that it was preferred to keep it going. And I thought that was so interesting. And it's like, until you kind of make that self commitment around what you will or won't tolerate, or check in around your own boundaries, how do you know what to say yes or no to, or how do you know what to communicate or not? And also, I think a big side note is like, this is fluid. This can change and evolve for you over time. They could ebb and flow, loosen, tighten. You might be coming off a trauma where something is such a hard no, and in your own healing, it soften and soften and soften. And to be able to really have some intentional check-in around boundaries for yourself.
Absolutely. I think addiction recovery is a great example of like how things can be fluid. There may be times in, like, for me, um, you know, 6 or 7 years ago, and I'm not saying I want to go sit at a party where there's a bunch of cocaine, but there have been times in my recovery where that would have needed to be a hard boundary for me. I could not be at a party and watch people doing a bunch of lines of coke because I would want to do it, right? It would make me feel unsafe. It would compromise my ability to be well and to be healthy and so I'd like to think that today I could be in that environment. I think what I'm saying is like, yeah, that boundary has softened, at least my perspective on it, to where now I'm like, well, it still probably wouldn't necessarily be a party I'd want to be at. Why am I at that party? But maybe it's because I got invited to like this after party for, you know, the Grammys. Yeah, whatever. I'm at an award show. I only wanted to even go to the Grammys because I just watched A Star Is Born, and I'm like currently obsessing over Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. OMG. Have you seen the movie yet, Linda?
Not yet.
Oh my God. It's so good. It's so good. If you ever thought Bradley Cooper was hot, like, watch out, ladies or gentlemen, whoever you are who thinks Bradley Cooper's hot, because he's about to get 100 times hotter. He like fully like took Matthew McConaughey's throne in my mind. Matthew McConaughey was always my hottest. This is a real side note, ladies and gentlemen. Boundary. Talking about Linda, be like, put up your boundary.
Yes.
This is not what we're talking about right now.
No, in this boundary conversation.
You said something that I wanted to touch on, and I now, of course, don't know because now I'm just thinking about Bradley Cooper.
Yeah, the heart eye emoji. Well, anyway, around boundary.
What were we even talking about? Okay. We were talking about boundaries. We were talking about scripts a little bit. Things you can say. So like
one of the things, I'm going to interrupt you, but
yeah,
one
go
of the
ahead.
things about boundaries that I think, again, it's like you have to do some of this work on the inside and understand what you're feeling. Like when something feels wrong or off, be able to know like, oh, I'm getting some information that could be a great boundary tool. And that's something that, you know, I didn't feel like I had much like, you know, body acuity awareness over time. And as that's developed, like I can feel like my throat close up immediately. I'm like, all right, I'm getting some information. or my chest tighten. And, it's just when I replay the reel of my life, say even over the past 15 or 20 years, where the reason that I had no boundaries is I had like so little awareness of who I was and what I needed, and, emotions and feelings and all that. And as I was able to hone in on that, boundary setting really came in. And what's an interesting thought around boundaries too is in really like the professional world, and being able to fairly receive for your exchange, right? Money. So I find this come up a lot with entrepreneurs, and like, you know, downplaying their worth in that monetary exchange. And that itself is a boundary. And being able to say, like, this is my fee, or this is the experience for, this is the monetary exchange for the services, and being able to own that. And that leads me to self-worth with boundaries, and a strong boundary setter, and not strong in the sense of like the rigid strong, just knowing yourself, and knowing like you are worth these boundaries being honored. You are worth like fully receiving the compensation. You are worth your partner honoring whatever the boundary is that you set out, and your friends honoring that. And,
Yeah, I mean, I think some symptoms of healthy boundaries, like you know your limits, right? Which is what I hear you saying, like, your upper and lower limits. You can say yes or no to others' requests based on what you're willing to do or not willing to do. And you're not offended or taking it personally when other people say no to you, right? This is an example of a healthy boundary, is recognizing that there's a respect for a yes and a no.
I'm a boundary fist bumper. Like if I hear someone setting boundaries, I want to give them like a chest bump. I get so fired up. My boo did this the other day, and he's like, I'd actually rather stay here because it's going to be a later night and we want to have a place to go to. And I'm like, oh, you're setting a boundary. Like you're having foresight. I love this.
But yeah,
it's like so powerful, because in boundary setting, you're setting yourself up for success.
Absolutely. It's a mark of self-respect that you're not willing to tolerate, disrespect or abuse. It's a mark of, like you said, self-awareness, that you're able to communicate your own needs and your own feelings clearly. And it's also a marker of just the recognition of autonomy and agency and sovereignty, and the fact that we are the ones responsible for our own success and happiness and well-being. And it's our choice whether or not we experience that. And obviously, listen, there are times where you are doing everything that you can do to be responsible for your own happiness, well-being, and success, and life throws out some banana peels. And like, that's normal, right? But for the most part, other people's feelings are other people's responsibility, and your feelings are your responsibility. And that is what you get to take control of. And so creating boundaries is that process of, recognition of your feelings, gleaning the information from them, and figuring out implementation. Like, what do you do with that information so that you can feel safer, more secure, happier in your overall experience? Yeah.
We can't talk about boundaries without talking about codependency.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's like, so codependency, so having a difficult time separating your needs, issues, space, and emotions from other people's, right? Or having, there's a lot of ways that this can manifest itself, like, having trouble saying no for fear of rejection, not having enough time for yourself, feeling like you always need to have the check-in with this other person, feeling like, their reaction or response or whatever to something is going to color or determine how you proceed. Maybe even being wishy-washy, unable to communicate a no or a yes without kind of knowing how this other person feels about it. These are all symptoms that might be signs of codependent tendencies. And so I want to be very cautious and mindful here of like labels, and just like saying like, oh, I'm a codependent. Well, I don't think that's helpful. I think it's kind of like any sort of label, but I'd love to hear like codependent tendencies and like codependent behavior can absolutely have I think that's a more kind of legit way of saying like people pleasing, and it also encompasses so much more than that. So can you tell us like what is codependency in your mind and what experience do you have around it?
Yeah, and I agree with you. Anytime you're using a label to like stamp on almost what I would consider like victim mindset, is not the most empowering experience you could have with a label. So, however you use labels, maybe consider, is this empowering or disempowering? That's been a helpful tool for me. But codependent tendencies, yeah, like you said, kind of having to weigh in on everyone else first, or thinking like, well, what would they want versus what do I want? And the way that this can happen is, what can result is a huge loss of self. And I had experienced this in my own ways, and actually with a friend had gone to Coda for a bit, Codependence Anonymous, and just learned about it in a way that I could recognize and identify codependency more, and was introduced to the concept of interdependence, where it's like, I'm a whole, you're a whole, and we're having a relationship and it's thriving because I'm not taking and I don't need from you to be whole and myself. And that changed my life, honestly, like just understanding. And once again, it was because I was like very much in a loss of self to even be able to understand, well, what's a whole Linda to show up to any relationship. And I think that would have gone hand in hand with the times where I was relationship dumping, or emotional dumping. Dumps.
Yeah.
Dumps like a truck.
Guys, like what? So what are the most effective ways that you have found, besides like love and respect, it feels like love and respect me what are some other ways that you have found are helpful to set a boundary? Because I know.
A big one is like the self check-in. So this is like something, I call it a tool because it's something that helps me, but a tool that I use is, what do I need right now? How can I support myself right now? And in that question comes a pause and a check-in. And usually that's some kind of decision that may mean I'm not going to the event I thought I was going to go to because I needed to show up because Mary asked me to, but I don't really want to go. So it's like a grounding in that question. The truth check, what's true for me? What am I ignoring that I need to come face to face with to be able to communicate? And using my voice. And that can be in real time. There's been times where I've dug deep for the boundary set and I could feel like, oh, this is a hard boundary. It might have been some like language that I didn't appreciate with a touch of anger. And I said, this is a deal breaker for me. Please do not speak to me in that way. And, in that, it was just filled with so much love, and being able as like the boundary setter to just have some grace around where the other person's like operating system is coming from. That could have been completely normal. And so were they ever doing that to hurt you? I'm not at all saying that like abuse or mistreating of boundaries is okay, but what I am saying is that like we all have programming, and that programming can run deep. And in that might just mean that's not the best person for you to have a relationship with, friendship, whatever. I mean, even with family, you could get to a point where, you could love from a distance if it's that toxic. So those are my tools.
Yeah. So in actually communicating it, I like that you said, there's this opportunity to have some grace around it. I know that it can really be difficult to literally just figure out the words to say. So like an example, like some common examples, like if someone's yelling at you, like you can say, you may not yell at me. If you continue to yell at me, I'm going to exit this conversation. That's an example of setting a boundary. It's telling someone, this is what's not okay for me. And if it keeps happening, this is what's going to happen. Or even just, you may not yell at me. I'm going to exit the conversation now.
Yeah, there is two examples that come to mind. One is several work examples actually, but where it's like something was just so not working, and I was able to say, this isn't working. I'm not really sure what about it isn't working, but I need you to know that. And then from that point was allowed to be like the action and the pivots to either have it work or to go a different direction. And another one was I had a roommate once that like lost his shit, like yelled, like screamed. I left the apartment crying, like running to like the nearest safe place that I could. And we had a year lease, and that was like month one. And I found, and this is like a key that I've used many times in communication, but finding a neutral place. And I left the apartment when I felt like in a good place to communicate this. And I said, this was a zero tolerance experience. And if there is anything close to that, you will not live here.
Yeah.
And we were like in the hallway, and he understood. And we were able to have like a really great, experience. And he had his own anger stuff. And in that, like, there was a growth opportunity for him. And that was zero for me. I will not put myself in a situation that feels unsafe. And so that's another example of how to approach a boundary set.
Yeah. And I think if it's something where it's like work or volunteering or something where you have agreed to a particular commitment and then you need to change that, one thing that's helped me is like, and I learned this from my husband actually, is like, just always come to people with solutions, not problems. So figure out what is potentially a viable solution for them. Like, hey, I know I agreed, to head up fundraising for the church bake sale or whatever. I agreed to run the bake sale, but after reviewing my schedule, I realized that I won't be able to give it the time and attention it needs. So I'll be asking 3 different people to take over for me, and I'll help find
here's a check for $1 million.
By the end of the week, yeah. I bought all the muffins and I'm going home.
That's it. When I've learned this in business is like, if you can't fully deliver on something for whatever reason, right? And that might have been through setting a boundary, but to then over deliver in some way. Mm-hmm. So to be able to make it even like, it's almost like the letdown, the like, oh, I can't be on the church council, but I have X, Y, or Z. It's like so much better. Like, John's better than me anyway, and he's going to do it, but it just be better. And
John makes the best lemon bars. He's taken over the bake sale.
I think we're extra funny today.
But like, there's other things to set a boundary with someone. Like, okay, what else is common? Like someone's borrowed too much money from you, right? This is like where it can be hard. Like maybe that's your child, right? Or maybe that's your family member and they have a great need. This is where sometimes like, it's not always going to feel easy and fun and good to set a boundary. And sometimes it has to be as simple as like, you write yourself a little script, like, I won't be lending you money anymore. I care about you. And it's time for you to take responsibility for yourself.
And to deliver greater value, and I would love to connect you with, this personal finance advisor or our CPA who's going to have a one-on-one, like the opportunity for empowerment. And I had seen this in my previous career with parents just leaking money to their kids. But to be able to empower them for some element of self-sufficiency, I mean, you're able to give the greatest gift to someone through that. And within that lack of boundaries, noticing what is enabling.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think like when you're checking in around your boundaries, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, Linda. One thing that helps me is just to simply ask what needs my attention in my life at this time. What needs my attention? Because the area that feels like it needs the most attention is perhaps an area where you actually need some boundaries. Now, not always, but the reason that I say this is that the area that it feels like it needs the most attention is usually the area that's either struggling or it's overloaded, or, it feels like there's intensity in that area. Perhaps you're just in a really great space and it's like the area that needs attention is something constructive and positive that you want to work on. And so it's not a boundary thing at all. But I know that like for me, this came up because for me right now, what needs my attention in life, it feels consistently like it's work related stuff. And being an entrepreneur, and I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs that are listening, this can really easily happen, right? Like there's not a boundary. You work from home. What are those work hours? And like for me lately, it's like it's 6 a.m., to 10 p.m. with a couple breaks in there for eating, going to the bathroom, and taking care of my family. But when I think about all the work things that need attention, then I realize like, oh, I actually need to develop some boundaries in this area. I need to get some help in some of these areas, you know, so that I can have a healthier work-life balance, so that I can be a better parent. So like checking in, you know, your relationships, finances, health, you know, your spiritual well-being, your school, your volunteering, your finances, like what areas feel like there's like, ooh, those are like a bit sticky or they like need attention. And then like what comes up when you pay attention, like what you know, what feelings arise, what fears arise. Does that area feel like it's in alignment with your core values? You know, you touched on core values, Linda, earlier, and if people don't know what those are, like your core values are your guiding forces that are greater than your fear. So like when you have the desire to sacrifice yourself for the sake of something else, you can check in with like, does this thing that I'm trying to sacrifice for line up with my core values? And you know, you might have a long list like mine, my kind of top four: honesty, freedom, love, and fun. Right. And like, those are my guiding principles. And so a lot of times I'll notice misalignment because something's not fun, right? And then I'm like, oh God, I don't want to do this thing. It's such a drain. It's such a time suck. It's so horrible. I'm procrastinating. I'm putting it off. And then I'm like, what is going on around this? Why am I not doing it? And then when I just check back in with my core values, I'm like, oh, it doesn't bring me freedom and it's not fun. Like, no wonder I don't want to do it, right?
So you're suggesting that there could be, like, in the whole conversation of boundaries, also a misalignment, like a value misalignment that you might want to relook at if you're feeling like your boundaries are out of control.
Yeah. And I think checking in with fear, and then I think checking in with values, because I think a lot of times our need for a boundary or our like I think we recognize the need for the boundary, like you said, when we've already like violated it, right? Or when we've already gone a little bit too far. And so then it's like checking in with, well, why did that maybe happen? And for me, it's usually like fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of missing out. Like there's some sort of fear that, you know, like for example, like overworking. What's the fear? The fear is that I'm not going to have any money, right? It's like, that's real simple, right? You know, the you know, saying yes to go to this friend's party thing when like I already know as soon as I get the invitation that I don't want to go. Could that be a fear or a little bit of social anxiety? Or could I be saying yes because I have, you know, the fear of rejection, that if I don't go to enough of their social events that they won't want to be my friend anymore? Do I have the fear of missing out, of like, well, what if something really cool happens? So like just checking in.
And boundaries are not an excuse to not show up. And what I mean by that is, you know, I feel like boundaries can be a focus a lot of times, like as there's self-awareness, it's part of that conversation of honoring your own boundaries. And I've witnessed from time to time where it's almost like, well, that's a boundary. And it's just becomes like almost an excuse in some ways. And so, you know, a real heightened level of awareness around your own boundaries and how you use them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think once you do figure out what they are, like if you know, you kind of can greet these fear gremlins and like get clear on your values and create and communicate your boundaries, like then celebrate that. Do not apologize for it. Like it is actually a wonderful thing. And Linda, I love that you said that like you celebrate other people's boundaries. Like you're like fist bump, chest bump, like that's awesome. High five. Like
boundary. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't owe an apology to anyone for staying true to yourself. So your honesty, your authenticity, and like your willingness to be fully yourself, like you are actually giving other people permission to do the same thing. You were not put here to please other people. You're put here to experience life the way that you choose to experience it. And so boundaries are going to enable you to do that.
The I'm sorry, like, because this reminds me of the I'm sorry, and I changed that recently to thank you.
Hell yeah, girl.
Thank you for your flexibility in waiting for me. You're the best.
Yes.
You know? And
notice this if you do it in emails or in text messages. Every time, even like go ahead and change, like, you know how in your iPhone you can change like the text thing, like if you type the word sorry, it's going to automatically change it to thank you. Right. So like when you start typing sorry, your phone's going to be like, no, you mean thank you for your patience. You mean thank you for your patience with this email response. Thank you. Like it's a reframe that affects not just you, but the recipient as well. So as soon as we say sorry, we are accepting some kind of fault. We are creating an expectation in the other person that they should be disappointed or upset around something. As soon as we say thank you, we're putting on that lens of appreciation for the other person, which is it's a way higher vibe of operation mode for your overall life.
And when I do that, when it's truly and I'm sorry, being able to say like what the potential amends is, like kind of like how can I make that up to you? And that's been my check-in, is if I don't even have a potential solution that I could make amends, like then an I'm sorry isn't going to go out of my mouth. So like if I'm late and I can't change that, it's a thank you. And if that person needs to reschedule, that's their boundary. Or if they're like, fuck you, Linda, every time we meet you're late, no, I'll be like, oh, like good, I need to tighten this up a little bit. But that's the truth right there that like helps each person grow.
Boom. Big sigh. Everybody take a big breath. And as you exhale, take us to the book club.
So for this week's book club is Boundaries: When to Say Yes, How to Say No, and to Take Control of Your Life. And this is by Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. And this book had been circling in my sphere for a while. And there's actually workbooks for both marriage, kids, and dating. So if you want to take it up a level, you can do that. And it's really an amazing book that I think, Amelia, as you're talking about the scripts and just some questions where can I still set limits and be a loving person? What are boundaries? Diving deeper. So as you're having some inquiry, maybe this hasn't been front of mind for you, you can start to set up your own framework. And along with posting this week's book club, I would love to offer with our vision casting for the new year, we'll put that out with the different life categories and for you to look at those in terms of boundaries you could set, low-hanging fruit for boundaries that you could address for yourself. So stay tuned to that in the show notes.
Absolutely. And just remember, you guys, as we close today, that you are responsible for your feelings. So you always have the opportunity to regain your personal power by choosing a simple mantra like, I create my experience. I am enough. I decide what happens in my life. No one else.
Setting boundaries is fun and easy.
Hell yeah, girl. Setting boundaries is fun and easy. So we love you guys. We appreciate you. Give us a review, hit subscribe if you enjoy this show, and don't forget to connect with us on the gram of the Insta.
Instagram.
We're at Rise to Thrive Podcast, and we love to hear from you guys. We love to hear your requests. We're going to be starting to feature some interviews coming up in the next couple of months. So if there's someone that you really want to hear on the show, let us know who they are. And we hope that you're able to have some little nuggets of wisdom that you've taken away from today that are going to help you feel more confident, more secure, and really more freedom in your life. Always serving up the gems weekly
so you can
thrive daily. All right. We love you guys. Keep rising, keep thriving, and we'll catch you on the flip side.